Welcome to the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons podcast. I'm your host, Peter Chalmers, a shoulder and elbow surgeon at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Rachel Frank, a sports and shoulder surgeon at the University of Colorado in Denver. Rachel, how are you?
I'm doing outstanding. Pete, how are you today?
Oh, I'm good. Before we get started, I should mention the views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons Society, the University of Utah, the University of Colorado, or the institutions of any of our guests. Okay, today we have an episode on a topic that is relevant to everyone, which is work-life balance, specifically how to maintain your physical and mental health as a surgeon. So this is a topic that's important to everyone, but it is frequently overlooked, infrequently discussed. And I think it's a really constant struggle as an orthopedic shoulder surgeon, and certainly one that I'm still working on. So I'm hoping to learn from our two guests. So first, from Kaiser Permanente in California, we have Dr. Ron Navarro. Ron, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks you guys for having me. Really enjoy the podcast and I appreciate the invite tonight.
And next we have Dr. Gabe Horneff from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Gabe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Rachel. Really appreciate being here.
So this topic is a real challenge to navigate, and I wanted us to start with kind of the less controversial, maybe less touchy-feely part, which is physical health. So I want each of you to kind of delve a little bit into what you think the keys are to maintaining your physical health when you're working as a busy academic surgeon. So maybe, Ron, you could start out for us here. What are the keys?
I think I've personally taken the time to just carve out time for myself. I'm always embarrassed to talk about some of the times I wake up to people, especially like Gabe on the East Coast, who seem like they get up at 3 or 4 in the morning to start their day. But I do Pilates or a reformer work at 6 a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then I do cycling with my wife on Saturdays. And I'm a little bit longer in the tooth than I think everybody else on this podcast. And I have a young daughter who's 17, so I want to be around a long time. So I do it for me and I do it for my family. And it really, a lot of people have talked about the benefits of exercise in terms of mental health, in terms of just feeling good and being able to sleep easy at night. And so that's the short of it.
What about you, Gabe? Is exercise also the key for you? What else would you add?
Yeah, I think exercise is a huge component. I think, being a little bit younger than Ron, not too far removed from the busyness of when we were residents and it seemed like we were working nonstop, it was easy to kind of put your own health sort of the wayside. And I definitely got away from it for a while and then started to get back into it. And now I make a point to really carve out, some time in the afternoon when I get home from work to work out. And just to kind of not think about anything work related, and also sometimes maybe do some of my best thinking while I'm working out, where I'm not really feel like I have to sort of hone in on something. Can just kind of turn some music on, get the blood pumping a little bit, and really allow myself to kind of just take care of my own bodies. But I think working out is a huge component to all of this.
And Peter, I mean, I think Gabe would say, and I think you all have seen it, there's a lot of other things people talk about, and some of it I try to practice, but not all of it. But some things like a strong, supportive family, showing gratitude toward others, being involved in charity. Those are kind of some of the other things, and some of them, and spirituality, however you define that. Some of those things can really help kind of gird you for the tough times too.
Can I ask both of you, I've heard this a lot recently from surgeons at all stages in their career. They actually schedule time on their calendar, whether, Outlook or Google or whatever they're using for workouts or yoga or meditation or whatever, but it's on their calendar so that their admins or their assistants know not to schedule anything into that, so that they know that that's their time. Do you guys do that? Like, do you get as nuanced as doing it like that? Or is it just something that you do on these days? And if you miss it, you miss it, but this is what you do. Ron, let's start with you. Any advice on that? Is that something you do so people don't bug you or reschedule you during those times?
Yeah, I have a mindfulness app and it kind of dings and it kind of reminds me on its own without having to use my schedule or calendar. And so that gives me that kind of 2 to 10 minutes just to kind of breathe deeply and kind of get into like the space and time of the moment, and hopefully nothing else. It sometimes gets interrupted. So I do some scheduling to a degree with the help of an app.
And then Gabe, how about you? Do you put in time specifically on your calendar so your team knows this is when I'm working out, or is it just something that you do when you get done with the day?
It's typically something I get done with at the end of the day. If it's a bigger thing beyond just my normal, weekly workout routines, family events or whatnot, I make sure to put that in a calendar that is shared with some of the people on my team, just to let them know that, hey, there's a really important thing that Dr. Horneff has to deal with, and he's not going to be able to see patients at that time. It's interesting though. I do like the idea of putting it in the calendar. I mean, I tend to live and die by my calendar. It's a joke between me and my wife that if you didn't put it in the calendar, then nobody's responsible for it. But I think, one of the hardest things any of us struggle with is making the workout routine a habit. And if it's something where you have to put it in the calendar to remind yourself, to make it a little bit more visual for you, I think that's important. I think it's also important to realize that, hey, if you happen to miss it, because inevitably some parts of our work do creep in from time to time, to not get negative and down on that and think of it as some sort of failure, because I mean that's not really the goal. The goal is to try to do it as often as you can, but you can't get frustrated with yourself when other things get in the way. But I do like that idea of kind of seeing it as part of your routine.
Now let's talk sleep. This is an interesting topic. We've have had several surgeons on who openly admit that they don't sleep that much. And while our understanding on this topic has changed over the last decade or so, this certainly used to be considered a, so to speak, badge of honor. If you didn't get any sleep, or you only sleep 3 hours, and you wake up at 3 and you work out, and then you go to work and you write a paper, and then you mentor, and then you operate, and then you see patients, etc. But we know poor sleep habits, minimal sleep causes a lot of health problems, even shortens the lifespan. So what are your guys' thoughts on sleep? How many hours do you actually get? And what do you think about it when people say, yeah, and I've been guilty of this. I don't do it to brag. I actually do it more to complain when I only get the amount of sleep that I get. And so I'm looking for advice here too. Gabe, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on sleep? And tell us, how many hours do you typically get?
So I am a huge proponent of sleep. I will tell you that I think for me, I'm not one of these people to go to bed at midnight. I really try to get to sleep by 10, 11 o'clock at the latest, and try to get somewhere between 6 to 8 hours. It's hard to do, especially with three young kids, and trying to complete all their hobbies and everything, and getting home at a decent time and trying to have dinner. But I think the most important thing is to have good sleep hygiene. I am a huge proponent of, when it's time to go to bed, it is time to go to bed. I don't, and I think a lot of people are guilty of this. I don't take my phone and play with it in the bed. I do use it as my alarm clock, so it's on my nightstand, but I don't sit there and scroll for hours on the news or anything like that. I try not to watch any television when I go to bed. I really make it, this is the time to shut everything off, and I think that is a huge thing. It's just better for your sleep hygiene and helps you get better sleep.
Ron, what are your thoughts? How many hours do you get, and how do you advise us to have good sleep hygiene, or is it not important? And is it okay to just have those 3 to 4 or 5 hours and call it a day?
I am guilty of a lot of things Gabe just described. The scroll, I go to bed at midnight, but I've really looked into this further. Interestingly, from a younger partner who's had a family history of some diseases that are somehow causally, lack of sleep is causally related to some of the genetic diseases that he has, not genetic, but other family members have had. And so I got the auto sleep app, and for a while I was tracking my sleep and the quality of sleep. So I do have an alarm on my phone that tells me that I should go to bed at 10, which makes me usually get in bed by 11. So at least it dings and reminds me. And for a time, I was measuring the deep sleep, the REM sleep, etc. And frankly, it's a little bit annoying to have like a wristwatch on, or a chest type device that kind of wraps around you to kind of measure these things so deeply. And it just gave me a really understanding of what my baseline measures were. And I mean, I just try to hope that I can get at least 6 hours. And in real fundamental terms, if I have dreams in my sleep, I know I'm in deeper parts of sleep. So I'm very happy in the mornings where I've had a dream, regardless of the content of the dream, but because I know I've got that most valuable sleep that is so beneficial, as Gabe was describing.
Yeah, I love your approach, Gabe. I couldn't agree with you more that that sleep hygiene is critical, and it's not just that. I think it's also avoidance of late night meals, caffeine afternoon, like all those things actually I think do matter. Let's talk nutrition. So, one of the challenges I have, and I think everyone has this, is you're running behind in clinic. The morning flows into the afternoon. It's 12:45. The afternoon patients are starting to show up. You're like, I gotta go eat lunch. I'm so hungry. Or you're running from clinic to the OR to do an add-on. So let's talk tricks for how you get a balanced diet in while running between clinic and the OR and all of the other responsibilities we have in our lives. Ron, how do you manage this? What are the tricks for you so that you can continue to get the nutrition that you need and not just fill up on junk?
I've got a great spouse that's able to kind of just keep really good foods in the house. In when I was younger, I really would think things like Whole Foods and in our area, Bristol Farms, really a little bit higher end stores where you could do your shopping. I thought it was all kind of a joke, but organic foods, less processed foods. I try and bring those to work, so I'm snacking on things which are really healthy, which bring down those cravings that I would have. And then fortunately in our system in Kaiser Permanente, some of the foods that they serve, they've gone to a place where they only order from more organic or fresher ingredients types places. It's not always the most flavor. I love the old days when it was a lot more pizza and Mexican food, but we don't get that as much. But I think it's better off for my health. So I have some built-in savers with family and the system that help me.
What about you, Gabe? What tips do you have in this regard?
I don't know if it's necessarily tips. Some of it is just habits that I've always had. For better or worse, I am not somebody to eat breakfast or lunch during the day. I know now it is considered, intermittent fasting, which is sort of the in vogue term of how you describe how I eat. But I just generally don't eat during the day. It was never really for a diet thing. It was just I found that if I would eat something during the day, I tended to become sluggish afterwards. I really got that postprandial, tiredness that came with it. During the day, I typically, I will have a cup of coffee in the morning. I'll usually drink, water or some sort of sports drink during the day. And then when I get home, when I was a resident, I definitely was guilty of coming home and just sort of gorging myself. I would snack, I would eat dinner, then I would snack again. And, as Ron mentioned, likewise, I have a great wife who cooks decent meals. And, I'm not just popping something into a microwave or anything like that. And I really have tried I say older, not that I'm old, but I'm 40 now. And I try in my older years to try to avoid anything that comes in a box or a bag. That's sort of my way of kind of making sure that I'm not trying to eat anything that's highly processed. I mean, we're all guilty of, the weekends, and especially with running my kids around, sometimes it's easier to just pick up something at, a hockey rink or wherever they're playing sports or whatnot. But I really do, when I'm home, try to avoid, opening the cabinets and diving into any snacks.
Gabe, I got to say, I'm so impressed you can get to dinner without a meal. I'm not a breakfast guy, but if I don't have my lunch, I'm a bad person.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to do that. Some people are grazers and just kind of snack on things all day. And like I said, when people I work with say, "Oh, what are you, intermittent fasting?" It's just always been the way I've been. I've been that, when we took tests when we were younger, I never like woke up in the morning and had a big breakfast or anything. It's just, I think we all run a little bit differently. I think it's just more important focusing on the types of foods that you eat, however you space them out during the day. And, to what Ron said, anything that's highly processed, we know it's bad for you in the long term.
I really
Ron,
like.
are you saying, Ron, that do you get hangry?
Yes, a little. But I do agree with Gabe that, like, because some people kind of beat me down for not having a big breakfast. I've just never been that person. And so I think we're all made differently. So I hope that there's research that comes out that validates my viewpoint that some people need that big breakfast. Some people like Gabe can get to dinner. Some people like me can just, lunch is what kind of starts our nutritional day. But I did want to kind of riff on what Peter was talking about earlier with regard to sleep. Doing that, eating late is also like a bad for sleep. So these things all are combined. And, another thing, which we're not really talking about it per se, but drinking alcohol later at night affects the sleep. It can affect nutritional parameters. So I think everything is related to everything else, just like everything else in our life. It's just interesting how it all plays together.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't, the alcohol thing, I think, is an important point that I wasn't going to touch on in this. I mean, I think that it's important to acknowledge when we talk about work-life balance and mental and physical health that that there's an important component of avoidance of substance abuse within that, and it's so hard in our society because there's so much normalization of a lot of that, but at the same time, it's also considered normal within social circumstances, and I think there are definitely surgeons that fall into bad habits in that regard, and maybe it creeps up on them. I wanted to ask both of you, both of you I know are people that are, doing a good job of like maintaining a balance here. What other tips do you have on physical health before we move on to mental health? I mean, have I missed anything? What are the other things that you think are important to mention in this regard?
Gabe?
I'm happy to go first.
Please.
So for me, a really big personal health journey occurred literally the day after I turned 40 years old in November. I ended up finding a lump and ended up being diagnosed with testicular cancer. Um, I was very fortunate and sort of it was very serendipitous the way I was able to have it fully diagnosed and treated, and ended up having surgery within a week or two, and then ended up doing a round of chemotherapy for a month in the month that followed. Um, the important thing that I think I garnered from all that was that we routinely do not take care of ourselves. We don't go to the doctors. We will often write antibiotics for ourselves if we're having a cold, or we just don't. We're constant creatures of go go go, and we focus on taking care of other patients. And I think what I learned from that whole journey, in addition to a lot of other things, was I make my regular doctor checkups now, not just for the cancer that I went through and survived, but also I've gone ahead and I've made my regular normal checkups now, being 40 years old, and I will plan to screen the normal screenings and all that. Um, and just because you work in a healthcare setting, it's very easy for you to just kind of put your own health to the wayside. And I think that's the most important thing, is realizing that, you know, as busy as you are and as busy as your schedule is, you do need, and this is probably even more important than carving out time for working out, you do need to carve in your doctor's appointments. And whether that's on an administrative day or whatnot, your dental appointments, your, ophthalmology appointments, what have you, to take care of yourself. Because, ultimately, if any part of your body fails, then your whole job as a surgeon and working with your hands and working with your mind can fail too.
Gabe, that's a really powerful story. It reminds me I have to go get my PSA check, but and I try to espouse and live by a lot of the things you just described in terms of scheduling time for my own health checks, and our system once again supports that. To answer Peter's question, I also when COVID started, my wife and I were like together a lot more during the days when it was really, everything was locked down. And I kind of felt like it was one of the best experiences of my life, because we would go on daily walks and I got so much more walking time in, other than the exercise that we were talking about earlier. It just built in physical activity. And I also, and I'm sure you all ascribe to the same thing, I take the stairs. I park far from where the door is, so I can get my steps in. Just that alone is really critical. And if you can maintain a lot of that, it also is that other physical way to kind of maintain yourself too. I just wanted to add that, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Gabe, your story, first off, I appreciate you sharing with us and with our listeners. The thing that I think it brings to light is that as surgeons, there's definitely a sublimation of self into the job where you say, my needs are not important. The needs of the patient are more important than my needs. And I think that's true to an extent, but I think what you say is so important to say that if you are yourself not of good health, you cannot do your job effectively. But we're not taught to think that way. Like, for instance, when I was a resident, and it's so funny, we talk about nutrition and you mentioned not eating lunch. I remember as a resident, I never watched Tony Romeo eat anything other than a metrics bar. Like, I never watched the guy actually sit down and eat a meal. And I remember thinking, like, it's like the guy isn't human. I mean, it's like he's a shoulder surgery robot. I remember thinking, like, isn't this admirable? Isn't this the person I want to be? But I think what you say is so true, that we have to think of ourselves as human, and we have to care for ourselves, or we won't be able to do the jobs that obviously all of us would like to do. I wanted to ask you, Gabe, it's a big experience. How do you approach other things differently? Like, has it affected your mental outlook? Has it affected the way that you manage your time? Like, how has this altered, the rest of your life, other than the fact that you go to doctor's appointments the rest of us should be going to now?
I will tell you that it has changed me for the better, and has made me a better person in a way that is sometimes hard to express. And my wife will often joke that I was so bullheaded and so worried about achieving things and comparing myself to peers and stuff like that, that it took something like that for me to kind of throttle back and be like, wow, live in the moment, try not to worry about stuff as much. I will tell you that as a shoulder surgeon, it's made me more compassionate to my patients in some regards. I will admit that sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating because sometimes we get patients where at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, you have a little bit of shoulder pain for a week, and it's not the end of the world, but you have to sort of dial it back and realize it's a huge change for them. I talk about it openly. I have no problem talking about it openly. It was weird at the beginning when it first happened, but then I felt that I've actually reached out to more people and maybe have inspired more people to take care of themselves by talking about it openly. And patients really connect with that. I've had a lot of patients who are also cancer survivors, and when I bring that up to them, I mean, it's an instant connection, and I think it makes them feel like, okay, this doctor actually gets me and understands me. And it's allowed me to take the pressure off myself. The things I used to worry about, I don't worry about. We all have deadlines. We all have things we're trying to achieve. And I wouldn't say that now I'm a slacker of any sort, but I definitely, that work-life balance, it's not a balance anymore. It's definitely more life and family. And I think I do a good job of being a good surgeon, but I know that I do a much better job of being a father and a husband than I ever did.
All right, let's talk a little bit about mental health, and you guys have touched on a little bit of this because it's all related, physical, mental, emotional health. It's all related, and the things we do to try to stay healthy certainly have, one has an impact on another. But let's talk a little bit about mental health first and foremost. What do you guys think about mental health in general? Certainly, there's been stigma with physicians admitting or acknowledging that maybe they are dealing with mental health. There's sometimes stigma against patients with mental health problems, etc. What are your guys' approach? How do you talk to residents and fellows about this, just about mental health in general? Ron, let's start with you.
I've like Gabe, I have personal experience with this. I have a family member who's had some degree of mental health issues. And we really need to get more involved with that, to the point of getting the person on meds, and it's really stabilized their mental condition. And so it's really brought a lot more shared obviousness to me, where I think, Rachel, as you were describing, a lot of us just tend to think, oh, that's only other people, it's not us, and it's only these certain numbers of patients, and it's not us. Now it's me, it's in my family. So it's brought compassion, like Gabe was saying, that he had after his physical health malady. It's really changed my attitude. And so I openly acknowledge it when I'm teaching residents or medical students, and I try to understand it in my colleagues, etc. And really, some of the things that I found out in, like, delving deeper into it, orthopedic surgeons tend to have a higher suicide rate than other medical health professionals, which was completely shocking to me, given that I always believed we're like carpenters. We build it and move on. It's like a highly satisfying job, and usually highly satisfying jobs are the ones that engender the most mental benefits and health benefits. So really shocking. So I just try to bring it outward and face it head on, and talk to people about the problems, so that they know that they can feel comfortable with me sharing.
And Gabe, let me follow up on that with another question for you about this. I'm sure we're all variably active on social media and online forums, but on a lot of the physician-specific forums, whether it be for residents or fellows or attendings, and certainly relevant to all of our listeners on this podcast, there's a lot of people who ask how they should approach mental health when they're feeling depressed or feel like they might have depression or anxiety or OCD or some other mental health disease, but they don't want to admit it due to disability insurance. They don't want it on their record for whatever reason. There is still, unfortunately, a stigma with a lot of this. Particularly residents or even students may not want to disclose this, even if they need a day or a period of time off to deal with what's going on, just like they might for a physical condition such as a fracture, a rotator cuff tear, or something like that. They might need time away, but they don't want to face the stigma or potential negative repercussions or the unspoken things, the words that go on behind their backs and whatnot. What are your thoughts on this? How do you approach your residents and fellows? Is this something that is openly discussed at your program? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so our program does a really good job of allowing for the residents to have mental health days, to try to keep an open forum. I would say that for me, one of the best, personally, we all have given grand round lectures and whatnot. One of the best lectures I feel that I have ever sort of put together. It has nothing to do with shoulder surgery or anything like that. It actually just talks about sort of my experience as a young attending. And I really do focus the second half of that talk talking about burnout. And I think we're all on this call, and everybody who potentially is listening to this podcast, have gone through some level of burnout. And I think the best way I explain it to patients or to residents is that it's not okay, I was all right, and then next thing you know, I'm suicidal and needing to take medications. There's levels of burnout. There's levels of feeling like you're just not doing a good job, feeling like you're having a bad week, feeling like all your patients are doing terrible. And I think recognizing that and realizing and explaining to the residents that we've all gone through it, and even the people that we hold in such high regard as our societies and AOS and ASES, they have all gone through it. And maybe they've gone through it in a generation where it was less easy to talk about. And I think we're kind of on the precipice, or maybe even a little bit beyond the generation that it makes it okay to talk about it. And then I usually just tell them, I think the most important thing is to reach out to somebody. And at the very least, I tell them, you can always call me and talk about it. And it's basically a no judgment call. The one thing you touched upon that I don't think we talk about enough in medicine, you said social media. I think social media, which has been proven time and time again in the teenage population and a lot of the younger generation, um, is also sort of dangerous within the medical community. I think it's a very strong tool to get out the word about lectures and different ideas, but I think it can also fall into a trap for people where, especially as a young surgeon, you're a new attending, and have finished, you start comparing yourself to seeing some of these other people who post some amazing cases that they've done or some amazing conference that they went to, and here you are trying to just struggle and get your start. I think we have to also be mindful of what social media influence does to younger minds who are just starting as surgeons, because it's very easy to look at someone's highlight film and compare your whole day and your whole week to that, and not realize that, hey, they're not all having, fantastic days either. And I think, that's been proven in other parts of society, and yet we haven't really touched upon it in medicine. But I do worry about that as well.
So well said, Gabe. I mean, it's like the arms race right now. How many different apps can a person be on? Posting on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. It's like, wow, I don't know when they operate.
Yeah, and I mean it's a great tool, and I do think it's the future. And I think it's allowed us to communicate with each other and allow us to sort of easily talk to each other across the continent and across the world. But at the same time, I think we just have to be careful about it too, because there are people who sit in bed and scroll at night who don't have good sleep hygiene, who are looking at some of these things and being like, wow, these people are amazing, and I had an infection today and I'm not sure like how I'm going to manage this patient.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been doing a lot of research on social media, and we're doing several survey studies from the medical student level on up to the attending level, up through the patient level. And it's funny. It's social media is always, you're wanting, you feel this pressure to keep up with the Joneses, where you see exactly like you said, Gabe, you see people doing all these fabulous things, and you might be doing them as well, but you're not posting on them, or you might have had a horrible day and you feel like you're the world's worst surgeon or worst person or whatever it might be. And it's all based on things that we're seeing now on our phone that we never saw 20 years ago because it wasn't available. But then there's the other side. For example, on Facebook, there's this women in orthopedics group, and there's a lot of different topics that get posted. But one of them are when different surgeons post on difficult cases or complications or asking for advice. And it's a forum that prior to social media, we would never have had. And it's a place to get advice in kind of a non-judgmental way. So there's certainly pluses and minuses, but I think the risks of trying to keep up with the Joneses, trying to show that you're doing all these things at all times could potentially outweigh the benefits. And it'll be interesting to see where these kinds of things go into the future. And sorry to go off on that little tangent, but I think social media brings up a visceral response for most of us. We either love it or hate it, but probably nowhere in between. And it'll be interesting to see where this goes moving forward.
Well, certainly. So, I mean, this topic is so deep. I mean, we could talk, I'm sure, for an hour about social media alone and its pluses and minuses. I usually just tell the residents and the fellows that come to work with me that the issue with this job is that the highs are high and the lows are low. And that if you execute a difficult surgery or you have a difficult pathology where the patient comes back with a good outcome, you will feel invincible. And when things go wrong, it's hard not to feel culpable. And I think if you don't take it a little bit personally when things go wrong, you're probably not doing the job correctly. I mean, you have to let those things hit you so that you can try and get better. Let's move on to another important aspect of this, which I think is relevant to many surgeons, but not everyone, obviously. But I want to talk about, Ron, you mentioned earlier how important your wife was for assisting you with your nutrition. Certainly, I think having a partner in this world makes a big difference. I wanted to ask both of you, as a busy surgeon, it's very easy to let that fall by the wayside. Certainly, there's many marriages that end in divorce among surgeons. And, I think that can be really negative. So what for both of you have been your key to maintaining your relationship with your spouse? And how do you do this with, all the responsibilities that we have at work and, and balancing that aspect of it? Maybe you could tell us about that, Ron. You've been through it for a lot of years.
Yeah, married over 30 years and just really have a wonderful partner who has grown as I've grown and evolved. And I think it goes without saying that it takes a lot of communication. We always joke that like first being married is like nothing. It's when you have kids, that you're actually there. And when you start putting yourself second and doing something for a greater cause, and in our case, it was our children and growing a life together, that really has helped us. And as I was alluding to earlier, just when you get to spend more time with the person, and I had also brought up spirituality, however that's defined for you. In some areas of that, it kind of is an expectation to maintain these relationships and not, and things happen for people, and some people grow apart. But I had a really, upbringing with a really expectant father who would never be pleased if I, got into a situation where I was walking away from a relationship. And he's passed away for like over 10 years now, but still really impactful for me. And so it's a combination of just growing with the person I'm with, and being able to be open about what's positive and negative, thinking about the greater good than just the two of our needs, and using spirituality to help me through, the inevitable difficulties that we all have with relationships.
What about you, Gabe? What have been your keys here? And then, you alluded earlier to your three children. You're, like me, you're really in the thick of it here with your kids. What have been the keys for you also to be both a parent and a surgeon, as well as, a husband or a wife and a surgeon?
Yeah, so I've been married for 11 years now. In 2 days, it'll be 12 years. We have 3 boys. I think the most important thing to a healthy marriage is the idea that there's going to be compromise. And it's funny, my wife and I, we joke about it all the time, but kind of early when we were dating, my wife is a school teacher. She's not in medicine. And we sat down one night and I explained to her, I said, this is not a normal job. I said, when I go through medical school and through residency, this is all going to be very stressful and very time consuming. And I kind of laid that out. I didn't want to surprise her, and I wanted to be honest with her. And um, obviously our relationship was much stronger than any stressors that could put on. But I think it's important that when you develop a relationship with somebody as a physician, you have to let them know that this is not a normal, I can go home and completely turn off my phone. I mean, we've talked about all these things we try to do to sort of help us do that. But the truth of the matter is that, our patients need us, and there's things that we have to take and attend to, whether it's being on call or whether it's, a patient calling with a complication or whatnot. And those aren't necessarily normal things that happen in other jobs where you can, leave the office and that's it. You don't have to deal with it till you get back there the next morning. So I think making sure that your partner understands that is probably the most important thing. I agree with Ron 100%. When you have kids, it changes the ball game entirely. The level of selflessness that you have to take on to be a good parent, and what it teaches you about how you can sort of tackle a challenge together with your spouse is huge. For me, um, I'm very involved, and I try to be as involved as I can to coach my kids' sports in some capacity. Sometimes that's a head coach situation. Sometimes it's assistant coach. I will, take time off when there's important things happening in their life, with something with school. I'll take a half a day, and I try to be there as much as I can for them. And then in the weekends, what I typically will do is, Sunday night is when I will reserve whatever time I needed to write a paper or go through notes or prepare for cases. But the rest of that weekend, when I get home Friday, barring that I'm not on call for the weekend, my time is 100% dedicated to them, and they know that. And Yeah, I think it's just, there's no textbook for it. Anybody will tell you you can read a million books about being a good parent or a good spouse, and I think we all just kind of figure it out on our own. I think there's, some highlights that you can do, but you just go about it and realize that now you're number two and your family's number one.
And Gabe, I don't know, you've said it so well. I say something simple to myself: who's going to be at my funeral? I don't think any of you, oh, nice people, you won't be at my funeral. My wife, if she's still alive, my kids, their kids. And so I just try and keep it real in terms of what's most important, what's right in front of me.
Yeah, I think that's a phrase I have certainly used, is that, There's people that we see and we think, wow, they've done it all and everything. But I'm sure we've all heard the stories of some of those people who've done it at the sacrifice of their own family. And um, I don't know. For me, I agree 100%. I mean, the people you care about are the people that are going to care about you when you're gone. So.
Well, let's get a little bit deeper with both of you as we're getting closer to the end of this podcast. Let's talk about the relationship each of you have with yourself. Particularly in the face of opposition that we're all regularly facing, be it from our hospital system, insurance companies, whatever it might be, stuff outside of work that's causing, stress that maybe piles into work. How do you guys manage your relationship with yourself? How do you maintain a positive outlook, looking at growth, et cetera? It kind of ties in probably a lot of what we've already discussed, but maybe something we haven't hit on. Ron, let's start with you on this.
Great question, Rachel. Wow, it's a tough one. Try and have self-reflection in a general way to understand kind of what's really driving me in our system too. And I got a chance to do some other study on this. I try and hear my inner voice and see what's being influenced by kind of my both conscious and unconscious biases, and saying, wow, do I want to just respond right away to what might trigger me or make me angry or make me frustrated, or that, like this, you say, the dwindling reimbursement, or the way that the EHR makes us feel, or mergers in our systems and making us feel less in control of our own environments. And so I try to understand what's triggering me and what's a more thoughtful way to go. And I also, I have, besides my wife, I have a twin brother who I kind of bounce a lot of things off of. He's in a completely different work environment, but still has really climbed the ladder of success. And I'm so proud of him. And so I use him as another person to advise me. I know you talked about yourself, but I think in looking at ourselves, we sometimes need an outside source to kind of level set us as to kind of what's an emotional response to things, and what's the appropriate or less reactionary response. And finally, I'll share something that I've learned. You have to, we learned in Kaiser Permanente this thing when we're in these heated environments in an administrative physician setting, that we have to stop, challenge, and choose. So when you feel like you're having a feeling of that's something other than positive or neutral, you have to stop. You have to kind of challenge yourself to kind of see why you're having that visceral response, and then choose the best path forward. It sounds fairly formulaic, but after a while you start doing this and you start seeing that you're kind of being more thoughtful with responses that could lead you into times where you have an emotional response otherwise. And I'm not always perfect at it. I mean, Hispanics tend to be pretty visceral at times, but it's really helped me to control the way I see the world and the way I approach things.
Gabe, what are your thoughts on this? Anything different or anything to add? And one thing I'd love for both you and Ron to maybe comment on is the topic of surgeon coaching. Different from a therapist, a psychologist, but there's been a lot of recent interest in surgeon coaching, just like athletes and musicians and artists have coaches or teachers. The thought of a surgeon having a coach, not necessarily for techniques, but just how to be an effective physician and surgeon. Gabe, what are your thoughts just in terms of, your personal growth and how you manage that in the face of what we all do every day? And then the thoughts on surgeon coaching.
I've gotten better with it. I'm not perfect at it by any means. I probably never will be. One of the best advice pieces I got from one of my mentors in fellowship, I asked, like, when does this start to feel easier? And I remember him saying, it really takes about 5 or 6 years until you feel like you can go to bed the night before an OR day and not really stress too much about it, get a good night's sleep, and feel like you can walk in there the next day pretty confidently. And I feel like that just comes with experience. So I think there is this natural progression in the beginning where you're sort of uptight, you want to do everything perfectly, and then eventually, as you get more cases under your belt and see more patients in the office and have more experience, you start to get a little bit more calm. It's this weird thing too, where I don't want to say you develop apathy, but you start to develop thicker skin, and I think that's really important in allowing yourself to, you obviously want to maintain this idea that you're going to do your best. You want to maintain this idea that I'm going to do what's right for my patient. But if something goes wrong, or if a patient's unhappy, sure, it's going to bother you, and sure, that's probably the patient you're going to think of. Those, what Pete said, the lows are the lows, and they tend to override the highs of the highs. But I think at the same time, you try not to take it as personally. One of the things, and I joke about this with my wife all the time, is that I have more of these self-help books on my shelf now than I ever did in my life. But I really have read a lot of stuff by this author, Ryan Holiday. He talks a lot about stoicism. And to what Ron was saying earlier, it is normal in any situation, and whether it's a fight or flight response or whatever, whether a case isn't going well, or something's happening with your institution that you're not happy about, to have these emotions kind of rile up inside you. And one of the things these books talk about is that it's okay to have these emotions. That's fine. You have to have those emotions, but you also have to realize that once the emotion kind of passes through you, you take a step back and you say, okay, well, why did I feel that way? And then you start to look at it a little more rationally. And I think I do a better job of that as well. In terms of surgeon coaching, I will often tell the residents that I do think it's good to have a mentor-mentee program. You don't have to necessarily connect with every surgeon that you work with, but it's good to find someone who has a few years above you, and latch onto them sort of as a coach. Obviously, the ASES has done a much better job of having programs like that built in, but even within your own institution, it's good to sort of find a like-minded individual who doesn't even necessarily need to be within your own division, who you can lean on for basically just as a sort of a father figure within your practice. And I think that's a huge thing. I also think, again, trying to read into some of these self-help books are worth your time.
Well, certainly a wealth of good advice there about a difficult thing, which is how do you keep at it with a positive mindset. We've been kind of dancing around this the whole podcast, which is that for you to have good physical and mental health, you have to really effectively manage your time. And that's critical to making sure that you're actually spending time and effort towards the things that are important to you. So I wanted to ask both of you, what are your kind of top strategies for making sure that you're efficiently and wisely using your time, or at the very least using your time to accomplish the things you want to accomplish? How do you make work fit into that tight box so that you have time after work on the weekend, like Gabe mentioned, to do all the things you want to do to maintain yourself, your family, your relationships? Gabe, what's your best advice here?
Um, I do like the idea that we talked about kind of at the top of the podcast, of making sure that you have a schedule for things. I have set up a research meeting in the afternoon of Wednesdays, once a month, with the residents to go over projects. Obviously, there's emails and communication between that, but that's sort of a block time set aside for that. I have a routine as to when I prepare for my cases, like I was saying, Sunday evening. And I think it's just, if you allow yourself to set these blocks of time with what your expectations are to do them, and don't let things kind of bleed into each other, it doesn't have you sitting at the kitchen table looking at your phone and your kids wondering why you're not paying attention to them. It doesn't have you, coming home from work if you haven't completely completed everything you were supposed to do at work. One of the best quotes I ever heard was, clear your plate before you go home, or clear your desk before you go home. I try to get all my dictations done. I try to leave work at work. And again, I don't want people to think, again, comparing yourself like, oh, how's that even possible? I don't do it successfully every time, but I think trying to do that, it's a constant work in progress.
What about you, Ron? I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, and I know have really effectively managed it. What's the best tip?
Yeah, Gabe said a lot of it. The scheduling, the parsing out the times to do the different elements that make up the work life, so that you to some degree silo things and don't try to bleed them together. I've heard a lot more recently about multitasking and how it makes people so ineffective. So I've tried to limit my time to the matters at hand. I'm not great at it all the time. I think on my big clinic days, I still try to bang out a ton of emails that are sometimes administrative, sometimes about team care, sometimes about research. So I'm guilty of not doing that, but I try and focus my time on the matter at hand as much as I can because of the inefficiencies of multitasking. But the other thing too is I and this just sounds so corny and 20th century, but I'm a list maker. And I used to have little pieces of paper with boxes that I would check and say I got that done. But now I put it into my handheld. And so the moment something comes into my mind that I know I have to do, I put it on a list, and some of the list apps I have, I can kind of move things up and down to daily say what is the most important thing. So I knock out one or two of the big things because I never get through my lists. And I have to admit to you, Peter and Rachel and Gabe, I'm just a workaholic. I am defined by my work, so I'm probably not the best at answering this question either.
I do the same thing. I have in my notes app on my phone, I constantly have a list that I'm adding, and it's never to zero. I joke that the day that it has nothing on there is probably the day I'm going to die, because that means I've accomplished everything I need to accomplish. But
right.
But I use that list also. Sometimes I put stupid things on there just to, if I'm having a day where I feel like I'm not getting a lot done, I'll put a couple of simple things on there that I know I can scratch off, and then at least makes you feel like you accomplished something. Kind of that same idea where they say, if you make your bed every morning, you've started off the day accomplishing something. I think there's something to be said for that, and it just helps you with your psyche.
Totally agree. I think making your bed every morning, that one speech that that I forget the name of the guy who gave that speech, but military guy who talked about it, really resonates with me. And actually, funny enough, I take a Post-it note and keep it on kind of the mouse part of my laptop, and I make a little mini checkbox and list my tasks. Even though you could use your notes app, you could use anything electronic, I still physically write my to-do list for things I actually need to get done that I can't forget. And I like the satisfaction of checking that box, whatever it might be. So I totally agree. I think it's helpful to have whatever it is for your system, for all our listeners, that makes you feel good about getting something done. For me, it's physically writing it out, even though we have all these electronic things today. I like that handwritten note and the satisfaction of checking that box.
And Rachel, I shamelessly admit I still have slips of paper all over the place too, with check boxes.
It's crazy. I mean, we can get organized so easily electronically, but I just like the pieces of paper. I don't know why, but I don't know if I'll ever change. I also, Peter was talking about, one of our combined mentors, Tony Romeo at Rush, when we were both in residency. Another one of our mentors, Brian Cole, he, I don't know if he still does this, but I assume that he does, but his email in basket is kind of his to-do list. Like if there's emails in there, it means something needs to get done. And I use my in basket as the exact same thing. And when it starts getting really long where I can't scroll through, I know I'm way behind. And if I've ever cleared out my in basket, which happens maybe once a quarter, I feel really good for about 5 minutes till the next email comes in. But that's another strategy. And for those of anyone on the call or anyone listening who has all those red numbers on their icons with like a million unread emails, that kind of stuff gives me actual anxiety. I hate having those things for time management. I like to be knowing that I have everything done. Just again, going off on a tangent.
The challenge to that I have is that usually when someone else sends me an email, they're taking something from their to-do list and pushing it onto mine. So I often think of my email inbox as everyone else's to-do list. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily my to-do list. So that's always been my challenge. But the one thing I think everyone said that I think is really important is, in the job we have, there are times where you really need to focus. You need to say, everything else is off my plate. I need to do this case. I need to see this patient. I need to write this paper. And the act of taking something you need to do and putting it on a list takes it out of your mental space. Because then you don't have to, like, one of my favorite quotes about this is Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who said, "The man who has no memory can make one out of paper." So if you put something on your list, you no longer have to think about it. You say, okay, I don't have to worry about this on that list. When I'm done with this and I can go back to the list, I can think about that again. I don't need to think about that right now.
It's so true. It's a calming sort of thing that allows you to put it in a different space, silo it off, and then get back to it later. And Rachel, I used to do that, but boy, before a vacation with the in basket in the email, I would be at my office for like hours trying to get through everything. Now, to what Gabe says, now I just say, you know what? That in basket is always going to have stuff I can't get to. And sometimes it just sounds terrible. If it's low on my list, people will have to email me a second time if they really want me to get to it, because the stuff that's really big, we're all going to get to. But I love the idea, and I do use it as a means by which to scan the day and say, oh, I've put a flag on these emails and I'll get to some of them, but there's no way I could get to all of them. So my red number is very large.
I think for any residents listening to this talk too, this speaks very strongly and very highly to the early years of being a resident, where you're running the list, you're taking care of patients, and you're organizing what is urgent, what is emergent, what can kind of go on the back burner. And I often will tell the residents in their first couple of years, it's not maybe as sexy as being in the OR doing a case, but there's a lot to be learned by being an intern and understanding how to sort of organize the task. And I think the last thing I would just say, to all this is that the one common theme amongst all of us, and I think this is what people need to do to sort of be easier on themselves, is realize that there's nobody here who's an expert on this, and we're all trying to get better at it. And we found some things that work, and there's some things that we still need to work on. And I don't think anybody's going to ever perfect this. I don't know anyone who has.
Amen.
Well, on that note, I wanted to thank both of you guys for coming on. I mean, this has been just a tour de force, a wealth of great advice. And I think anyone listening to it can find a couple of things that they can use to make themselves healthier physically and mentally, and try and figure out how to avoid burnout and, be just, again, a better spouse, a better parent, a better surgeon in the long run. So thank you both for coming on and spending your time. And we really appreciate it. I think it'd be really valuable for listeners.
Thank you, Peter and Rachel. Appreciate the time. Gabe, awesome to be with you.
Peter, Rachel, awesome as always. And Ron, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you both so much for giving your time. And I bet we could go on for another hour or two about this topic and many other related topics. And thank you both for sharing your personal stories and anecdotes. This is so valuable, and I can't wait to re-listen to this, back when it gets released. That is unfortunately all the time we have for this podcast, because again, we could go on and on. We want to thank our guests so much for spending the time with us. For all of our shoulder and elbow listeners out there, please don't forget to subscribe. And for Pete Chalmers, I'm Rachel Frank, and we'll see you next time.